Okay, so welcome back to Kaspar. Johnny Trott has just heard that Kaspar's owner has sadly died. She was hit by a bus. And although there are still vehicles being pulled by horse and carts, you can see some buses in this picture here. So they did have buses like we know them when the story takes place. But sadly the owner's died, so let's find out what happens next. Okay. I cried myself to sleep that night. Mr. Freddy was right. The Countess had been like a mother to me. Not that I knew what a real mother was like, but she was certainly the mother I had always hoped to find. I had found her, and now she was gone. I had lost as well the first real friend I had ever had, the first person who'd ever told me that they liked me. I cannot tell you how grateful I have always been to her for that. In all my life I have never known anyone whose light shone so brightly, so brilliantly, and yet so briefly. The shock of her death stunned everyone. For days afterwards the whole hotel was plunged into a deep sadness. I hate to admit it, but to begin with I was too wrapped up in my own grief to notice Kaspar, nor to think much about him and what would happen to him now the Countess was gone. It took Mr. Freddy to jolt me out of my self-pity. "I've been watching you, Johnny lad," he said to me one evening. "You've been moping about the place all day. You've got to buck yourself up, you have. It won't hardly bring her back, will it? And I'm sure it's not what she would have wanted. You know what she would have wanted. She'd like for you to go on looking after that cat of hers as well as you can, for as long as you can. And if you're feeling bad, feel what that cat must be feeling. So you go up there, Johnny, and be nice to him. The Countess's rooms are bought and paid for another month at least, so I've been told, and I reckon it's your job to look after that Kaspar till someone from the family comes and fetches him away." So that's what I did. And that's when I began to notice how sad Kaspar had become. That's when I noticed something else too. Every time I went in to see Kaspar, it was as if the Countess was there in the room with me. Sometimes I thought I even smelt her perfume. Sometimes I was sure I heard her humming and singing. More than once, late in the evening, I heard that lullaby playing on the piano, and time and again I thought I caught sight of her in the mirror, but when I turned, she was not there. Just a little picture of Kaspar there, looking sad. Meow, poor Kaspar. I knew she had been there, though. I was certain of it. I wasn't frightened, not exactly, but what troubled me and made me uncomfortable every time I went into the room. It was obvious to me that Kaspar sensed her presence too. He was not himself at all. He was nervous, restless, anxious. He didn't purr any more. He stopped washing himself, and so as far as I could see he hardly slept. He spent hours searching the rooms for the Countess, yowling piteously. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink. He was clearly pining for her. I decided that maybe if I took him out more often for walks in the park it might help him. He drank from the puddles then, which was at least something. I tried to reassure him all I could. I told him over and over that everything would be all right. Sitting there on our bench one day I promised him faithfully that I'd look after him. But I could see he wasn't listening. More and more he just didn't seem to care. More and more he just didn't seem to want to go on living. I tried feeding him by hand, but he would only sniff at it and turn away. I tried calf's liver from the kitchen. I tried best beef, finely chopped. Nothing worked. Kaspar was losing weight all the time, losing his sleekness. Sat on the bench. It's Johnny Trott. And Kaspar. Meow meow. For a walk in the park. Meow. His coat was beginning to stir. He was already a ghost of his former self. There seemed to be nothing I could do to halt his decline. I knew if he went on like this it could only end one way. Now I would lie awake at night, not grieving for the Countess any more, but trying desperately to think of some way of saving Kaspar's life. It was during one of these long and sleepless nights that I had an idea. It occurred to me that it was only in the Countess's rooms that I'd felt her presence, that I'd caught my fleeting glimpses of her. Maybe it was the same for Kaspar. Maybe that was what was troubling him. If I got him out of those rooms somehow and away from her, he might possibly be able to forget her. I had it in my head that that was the only thing to do. The only thing I could do was to bring Kaspar up to my own little attic room and to look after him there. That was the only way I could be with him more often, but I knew from the start that there would be problems. Sooner or later, as Mr. Freddy had said, the Countess's relations would be coming to collect her belongings, and no one knew when that would be. One thing was for sure, they'd be coming for Kaspar too, and they would expect to find him in her rooms, and if he wasn't there, they'd be bound to ask me where he was. Just about anyone who worked in the hotel knew by now that I'd been looking after Kaspar. I couldn't say that I was keeping him in my room because we were absolutely forbidden to keep pets in our rooms. The house rules were very strict. No birds in cages, no goldfish, no cats, no dogs, and no mice. In fact, no friends of any kind were allowed up in the servants' room, animal or human. Breaking any of the house rules would lead to instant dismissal. Skullface would never have showed any mercy. I told Mr. Freddy my plans because I knew he'd understand. He said it was far too dangerous to take Kaspar up there, but I'd be out of a job and out on the streets if Skullface ever found out. You don't want to risk everything for a cat, Johnny, he said, not even Kaspar. It was good advice, and I thought about it long and hard, but in the end I knew I had no choice. I could think of no other way of saving Kaspar. I told everyone on the servants' corridor what I was doing, that there was no way I could keep a cat up in my room and keep it a secret from them. One thing was certain, none of them would snitch on me to Skullface. We all hated her far too much. Besides, they all realised by now just how ill Kaspar was, and they all wanted to help. He'd become quite a favourite. Late one evening we all crowded into my room, where Mary O'Connell, one of the scullery maids, made us all join hands and make a secret pact not to tell a living soul. Mary was an Irish girl from County Galway. She was a powerful character and had a persuasive way with words. She was very religious-minded, and she also made us swear on her Bible not to say a word. Luke Tandy, a waiter in the Riverside restaurant, said he wouldn't swear on the Bible because he didn't believe in all that religious malarkey. Well, you better believe something else then, Luke, Mary told him, wagging her finger at him. You say a word to a soul, and I'll beat the living daylights out of you, so I will. All I had to worry about now was Skullface herself. She hardly ever made an appearance on our corridor, but we all knew she could come up there any time. We had to keep an eye out for her, but most of all we had to get lucky. That same night I crept downstairs, let myself into the Countess's room, and carried Kaspar up to his new home in my little attic room. As soon as I got him there, I sat him on the bed beside me and gave him a good talking to. None of your yowling, Kaspar. If Skullface finds you up here, we're done for, you and me both, and you've got to eat. You've got to get better, do you hear me? He didn't yowl, but he didn't eat either. He just laid there, curled up on my bed, sleeping and hardly moved. When I left him to get on duty downstairs in the lobby, he took very little notice of me, and he took very little notice of me when I came back either. Mary O'Connell tried to feed him, tried to talk him into it, but he wasn't interested. Almost everyone on the corridor had a go. We tried chicken, salmon, even caviar once, anything Mary could filch from the kitchens without being noticed. All of it went uneaten. He wouldn't touch anything, not even his milk. The picture of him there with some caviar. Just think, his little fish eggs. Caviar. Meow. Just in case the Countess's relatives turned up, I'd put it about everywhere we all had that Kaspar had escaped from the Countess's rooms and could not be found. I made a great song and dance about organising a search of the whole hotel and pretended to be beside myself with worry, and I asked everyone to keep an eye out for him. Mr. Freddy knew what I was up to, of course, but besides Mary and Luke and all the gang on our corridor, nobody else did. So now I could only take Kaspar for his walk at night time, when hardly anyone would be about. I'd hurry out the back way through the tradesman's entrance, with Kaspar hidden under my coat. While we were out there in the park, he seemed to perk up for a while, but it never lasted. Back in my room, he would curl up again and close his eyes. Often I could hear him sighing deeply, almost as if he wished every breath to be his last. It broke my heart to see him like this. I felt so utterly helpless. I think we'll leave it there for today. Kaspar.